The EU is bringing Moscow to its knees and dictating tough terms. Either the army is dismantled or there will be no peace. The US, Europe, and Ukraine are rewriting the peace plan. Sensational. Ukraine is winning the battle for justice. There will be no amnesty for Russia. Shock. Trump is trapped. Compromising material, wiretapping, ultimatums. The whole world is in an uproar. I'll tell you all the details in just a moment. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Victoria Panchenko, and here are the latest events. The EU has proposed adding restrictions for Russia to the peace plan for Ukraine. The EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, stated that in order to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, Russia must make serious concessions and reduce its military power. This was reported by Politico. According to Kallas, the main focus of any peace agreement should be on forcing Russia to permanently cease its aggression and abandon attempts to change borders by force. She emphasized the EU's principled position on negotiations.
We have one aggressor and one victim. The main focus should be on what Russia must do. The aggressor, not on what Ukraine, the victim, should sacrifice.
She added that the draft plan circulated by the administration of US President Donald Trump did not include any concessions from Moscow. Kallas believes that the agreement must necessarily impose obligations on Russia, including limits on the size of its army and military spending. She warned that without such restrictions, aggression could happen again.
If you spend almost 40% of your total government expenditures on your armed forces, you will want to use them again. And that threatens all of us.
In addition, Kallas emphasized that if aggression is rewarded, it will serve as an invitation to use it again.
If aggression bears fruit, it will serve as an invitation to use aggression again and to use it elsewhere as well. And that is a threat to everyone in the world, especially to smaller countries. And in Europe, there are only two types of countries: small countries and those that have not yet realized they are small countries.
Kaja Kallas also confirmed plans to accelerate the use of frozen Russian assets to secure a $140 billion loan for Ukraine. Ukraine managed to remove from Donald Trump's proposed peace plan the controversial provision on amnesty, which caused the most concern regarding justice and Russia's accountability. This particular provision was the most controversial and sparked a wave of criticism and speculation in Ukrainian society. This was stated by Ukraine's ambassador to the US, Olga Stefanishina.
I can say unequivocally that the issue of amnesty is not included in the final 19 points. This point is not included because it is extremely controversial and concerns the issue of justice.
The removal of this provision means that Russia and its military can still be held accountable for war crimes committed against Ukraine. Stefanishina emphasized that the negotiation process is ongoing and the next rounds of discussions should clarify the parties' positions on the remaining points of the peace plan. Let us recall that Western media leaked documents containing 28 points, and experts immediately cried out, "This is Ukraine's capitulation. Dear Monday, But the political thriller is only just heating up. On November 23rd, there was an emergency meeting in Geneva between the US, Ukraine, and Europe. The plan was being rewritten on the fly. Then Trump backed down and the document was revised again. And that was just the warm-up. The stakes are rising. In the near future, Zelensky will meet with Trump to secure all the necessary conditions for Ukraine. Will Ukraine be able to turn the game around and seize the initiative? The latest information about the negotiations is already in our report.
No restrictions for the armed forces of Ukraine, no ban on joining NATO, and much more. The so-called Trump plan, in its original form, no longer exists. According to the Financial Times, it has been reduced by almost a third. However, the details have not yet been disclosed. As of now, after Geneva, there are fewer points.
At this point, after Geneva, there are fewer points. There are no longer 28 points, and much has been properly taken into account in this framework. There is still work for everyone to do together, even now. It's very difficult to create the final document, and everything needs to be done properly. And we appreciate that the majority of the world is ready to help us, and the American side is taking a constructive approach.
Sources familiar with the course of the negotiations report that the parties have agreed to continue discussing only issues related to bilateral relations between Ukraine and the United States. Certain topics should be addressed in other formats, since the original version of the document included nuances that did not depend on Ukraine at all. Now, by presenting a united front, Europe and Ukraine have decided to discuss. Each side will address its own issues with the United States while taking each other's interests into account.
This partnership not only allows us to act together, but it also shows that our shared interests actually create a strong foundation for joint action.
At the same time, to prevent leaks, no copies of the new peace agreement were handed out after the meeting, reported Ukraine's first deputy foreign minister Serhiy Kislytsia. All copies of the document agreed upon in Geneva were collected from everyone except the heads of the delegations. Nevertheless, some details still leaked to the press at the level of rumors. For example, there was a clear refusal to reduce the number of BSU at Moscow's behest.
Our European partners made it very clear that Ukraine's sovereignty cannot be discussed at all, nor can any restrictions on the army or on Ukraine's ability to join any alliance. These two are not up for discussion at all. And from this perspective, it is absolutely clear that demands, for example, to amend or change Ukraine's constitution in order to explicitly prohibit joining NATO will be dropped and will not be considered further. And I think these are the main important points that need to be emphasized and understood. It is important to recognize that these issues are fundamental and non-negotiable, and they form the basis of the current position.
Another crucial point for Ukraine was the discussion of security guarantees. According to analysts, Washington's representatives managed to convey that such commitments from the Russian Federation mean absolutely nothing. Therefore, the only real guarantees can be agreements with the US and Europe, as well as the unhindered development of Ukraine's own defense industry. And for the first time, it was stated that these are guarantees not only for Ukraine, but for the entire continent.
It's important to emphasize that in Europe, people are now increasingly talking about the necessity of guaranteeing peace through strength. European countries are now officially and openly stating that we must be fully prepared to fight against Russia, including potentially on Ukrainian territory if, after signing a peace agreement, Russia violates the agreed upon terms. And this moment, it seems to me, really represents a significant tectonic shift, because previously such things were never discussed at all.
At the same time, the White House believes that the negotiations to end the war in Ukraine have been productive. However, there are still some disagreements, said White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre following the meeting. She also said in an interview with Fox News that arms supplies to Ukraine have limitations and cannot be endless, as if hinting at what will happen to US aid if Kyiv pushes its position too aggressively. However, even when it comes to weapons, things are far from straightforward.
It is Europe that is buying American weapons for Ukraine. They are actually buying them. And from this point of view, Trump's threats, which were voiced not to supply weapons to Ukraine, would in fact be a violation of agreements not only with Ukraine but also with Europe about
the loss of billion-dollar contracts and the payment of penalties for breaking them. This is clearly not what Donald Trump is counting on. Meanwhile, the American delegation is already in Abu Dhabi, where several days of meetings will be held with the Russian side. A peace plan agreed upon on Sunday between the US and Ukraine will be presented to the Russian Federation. According to experts, given that earlier Moscow's statements were along the lines of "we haven't seen anything and need to look into the matter," this time the Kremlin is also not particularly inclined toward constructive dialogue.
But this gives the Russian Federation the opportunity to build a system in which they won't even, so to speak, get involved or consider this plan. In doing so, they are trying to keep the initiative on their side and avoid getting drawn into this negotiation process. Because getting involved would essentially mean playing by someone else's rules, by the rules of Kyiv, Europe, and Washington. Once again, Moscow does not want to be in a position where it is being led and is perceived primarily by the United States as the main obstacle to achieving peace.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
However, as analysts say, no one really expects that Putin will agree to terms acceptable to Europe without pressure. No one expects it, and this pressure should primarily come from Washington. And so, the main task is to convince the United States that there must be a peace plan. Specifically, this kind of plan.
Judging by the fact that the negotiations did not drag on and ended with a friendly dinner, these are clear signals and signs that everything went more than positively, more than well. And we know it's quite a complicated character. Steve Witkoff, a man who is both extremely wealthy and extremely capricious, would never have agreed, even just for the sake of politeness. He simply wouldn't have agreed to have dinner and spend his time if he felt that the results of the negotiations did not satisfy him.
Meanwhile, to ensure that Trump himself would not deviate from the course of peaceful settlement agreed upon at the meeting, his closest friends in European politics flew to Washington. Finnish President Alexander Stubb, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who have already demonstrated more than once that they know how to find an approach to Donald Trump. And
once again, shock. Trump issued an ultimatum to Kyiv. First, sign a peace treaty, and only then will security guarantees be considered. Meanwhile, dark clouds have gathered over the American president himself due to the scandal involving intercepted conversations at Itkov and Sheikov. To find out what is happening around the peace treaty right now, watch the following report.
In the corruption scandal that erupted in Ukraine known as Mingij Gate, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance saw a window of opportunity. This was reported by The Atlantic. Allegedly, Vance believed that the Ukrainian authorities found themselves in an extremely weak position and therefore would instantly agree to the 28 points, which, as has now been confirmed, were written in Moscow. Meanwhile, the New York Times reports that the new special envoy, Dan Driscoll, who also appeared at Vance's suggestion, was promoting the so-called peace plan among European diplomats with threats of incredible force. The Russians are ready to unleash their power not only on the Ukrainians.
He said, look, if before Russia was making missiles on the fly and immediately firing them at Ukraine, now the Russians have a stockpile. This is clearly a Russian narrative, and it's obviously not a story coming from Ukraine. It's a story invented by the Russians and handed over as a tool specifically to negotiators close to Vance and Witkoff.
Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry announced that they do not see Europe at the negotiating table for peace in Ukraine. And as is often the case, Putin once again explained when the fighting would end.
Ukrainian troops will withdraw from the territories they occupy. That's when the fighting will stop. If they don't withdraw,
we will achieve this by military means.
The Americans failed to get the peace plan on Trump's desk by Thanksgiving. But according to the media, they haven't given up on the idea and supposedly promised to consider security guarantees for the Ukrainians after President Zelensky signs the document.
It's clear that 4 years of full-scale invasion. But having lived through 4 years of full-scale invasion, I understand that even when there were security guarantees under the Budapest Memorandum, none of the parties that pledged to uphold them actually did so in the event of an attack on Ukraine. Now, they're talking about an agreement without any guarantees that in 6 months, a year, or 5 years, we won't find ourselves in an even more difficult war for Ukrainian society. That's definitely not a sufficient argument. Here, the Americans, if it's true, seem to want to push both sides. But somehow, it turns out that they're pushing Ukraine much more actively.
Meanwhile, after the scandal with the intercepted phone conversation between Witkoff, Dmitriev, and Ushakov, the White House is acting as if nothing happened. Donald Trump is busy pardoning a turkey.
I just want to tell you that this is actually really very important. That's really very good indeed. I really don't want to harm this absolutely beautiful bird. Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful. Thank you, guys.
Some senators are demanding that Donald fire Witkoff, who is literally suspected of working for Moscow. Some analysts believe that the leak of the phone conversations is actually a demonstration of the struggle between two sides for a place closer to Trump, with Vice President Vance on one side and Secretary of State Rubio on the other. By the way, the latter did not react in any way to the information about Witkoff's conversations, but only to journalists' reports that things are not so smooth and unified within the Republican wing. However, analysts believe that it is unlikely Trump will actually punish Witkoff.
Witkoff is someone from his business circle, from real estate. He also built hotels, including in New York. They're basically cut from the same cloth. They speak a language that both of them understand. There's not a drop of ideology in them. You can't spot any ideas in them at all. Neither of them cares in the slightest, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. Only one thing matters to them: interest. I think that, as one of my well-informed interlocutors said, when Witkoff came and told Donald Trump that we have a chance to get $150 billion from Russian money for some kind of joint fund, I think Trump said, go for it, go for it. Wonderful. $150 billion is exactly the kind of money you don't just find lying around. This, I think, is the main point here. Trump behaves like a businessman. not like a statesman, not like a diplomat. He has his own interests, and he strictly follows those interests.
Very soon, American politicians will enter the race for voters' favor. Senate elections are scheduled for November of next year. Currently, the Republicans have a 3-seat advantage in this government body. Just recently, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who until recently was a staunch supporter of Donald Trump, resigned, and journalist Don Bacon has told reporters he intends to follow her path. And this means that Donald Trump's party risks losing its majority even before the midterm elections. And what do you think about the EU's contribution to refining the peace plan? We look forward to your comments. Stay tuned for more important updates, and don't forget to like. Wishing you peaceful skies above.